So the first question I have is sort of, how would you classify this book? I think is the question that I had here. In some ways, it feels like a genre book, but there is obviously a large Jewish component to it. So how do you sort of see it?
Right. I mean, the closest counterpart I would compare it to is the Yiddish Policeman's Union by Michael Chabon, which was a huge influence. I mean, it's sitting over there. Just that book kind of blew me away in how idiosyncratically Jewish it was. It's told from the perspective of, from the perspective of a Yiddish-speaking town set in Alaska, obviously fictional, but just I was blown away by how much Chabon was able to get away with. And I figured if he can get that kind of into the weeds in terms of Judaism and Eastern European culture and Yiddish, then I could do the same thing with my own character. And that's sort of how this book was born. I mean, it was a confluence of a bunch of different things. I mean, a desire to tell my grandfather's story, a love of the noir genre, a love of alternate history, and just exploring my Judaism and the connection to pop culture. That's I'm always looking for that next kind of high of what's Jewish and what's a Jewish movie, what's a Jewish book or something like that. But it was really, so yeah, I'd say it's Jewish noir, murder mystery, period piece, alternate history. It's a lot of things.
It's interesting that we I think about this a lot also with like the idea of getting away with or interjecting Judaism within a piece that sort of still feels relevant to those who are not Jewish. Do you think that's like a specifically Jewish thing, maybe non-major, like we're not the major force obviously in culture in a way. So how do you sort of see that, that we have to get away with it, or is that like we pull one over, or it's just sort of people don't know enough about it?
I mean, it's a good question. I think, no, I'd say, it's just kind of, yeah, like you say, a lot of people don't know it. Judaism, we're such a small portion of the population. A lot of people don't know about our customs or religion or, our culture. And I just find it so fascinating. I mean, I can't put it into words. Like, it's just really cool. Like something like the golem or shadim or, just the insults that you have in Yiddish. I just love being part of this culture and this religion, and how kind of, so I'd say it's really a desire to kind of put that out in the world and just kind of express who I am. I mean, it's, you write it for yourself. I've said this a lot. I mean, you write the story for yourself, and if people respond to it, that's great, but you got to write it for yourself first and foremost, and if the story's, itching to get out, it'll get out.
Do you sort of see like that as a sort of job of yours? Like you were talking about sort of like you want to tell your grandfather's story. I mean, obviously we have sort of, I don't want to say a narrative, but yeah, maybe a narrative of like Jews being sort of a certain way, especially with the Holocaust sort of looming over the history, the most recent history of it all. Do you sort of see it as like a Jewish writer's imperative to retool that picture of Jews, or is it not even come to your mind like I'm a writer and then it happens to be I'm Jewish, so that sort of comes in as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be so arrogant and bold as to say, I'm a messianic figure, trying to bring the good word of the Jews to the public. I just, it's just something that I grew up in a proud Jewish household, and I'm just proud to be a Jew, and I'm very fascinated by our culture. And I just think it's really cool to put it into kind of a more mainstream context. I mean, recently a movie that came out, The Vigil, I don't know if you've seen it. It's a Jewish horror movie about Mazik. It's basically like a guy watching over dead bodies, being a shomer for an evening before a funeral, and he gets haunted by a Jewish demon, which is like, you never see that. It's always, Christianity or, demons from hell, but you never see a Jewish angle. So I just find that really cool, and you just don't see that enough, and it just kind of makes me really giddy. I can't really put it into words. It's just a lot of fun for me to see that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that it brings up the idea of representation, right? And what we see. I also think about a lot that, like, obviously not to border on the sort of anti-Semitic trope, but like there were a lot of Jews, and there still are a lot of Jews involved in entertainment, but it doesn't seem like there ever was particularly a Jewish voice that emerged. You would think that there would be more sort of pushing to culture, since there are so many Jews who seem to be working around the entertainment culture sort of world. And yet that doesn't seem to have been sort of how we went about things.
Yeah, I mean, just to give a shout out, there's two or two great producers who produced that film I just mentioned, two Orthodox guys working in Hollywood, JD Lifshitz and Raphael Margulies. JD was kind enough to provide a blurb for my book, and they're totally Shomer Shabbos and everything, and they're making, real movies and stuff. So it's definitely possible to live that life and be in the entertainment industry. But yeah, like you say, I mean, a lot of Jews are in the entertainment industry, but not that you'd ever know it.
Do you think that's like, I guess maybe, do you think that there's like a stigma even from within our community that like you can't make it being Jewish, or there's some sort of inherent desire to sort of mask the Judaism to allow for the most, not tenable, but like, I don't know what the right word is. I'm trying to think, it's on the tip of my tongue, but like that can be digestible sort of way to present Jews is maybe less Jewish in some way.
Right. I mean, I feel like there is sort of that idea. I think it varies from person to person. I can't really speak for everyone and say, it's a blanket statement for every, filmmaker and actor who's Jewish and doesn't, put it out there. But, I'm sure there is, and I felt it in my own life of kind of having to hide your Judaism, to kind of fit in. I mean, in college, I wore yarmulke for like the first 2 weeks or so, and then I stopped because it felt, I felt like an outsider. So I think, Jews, a lot of Jews experience that to a degree. Again, I can't speak for everyone, but yeah, it's definitely been my experience.
So walk me through, so you have the book, you wrote it, and now you're in sort of the let's get it out there stage. How does that go?
Yeah, I mean, once you write it, if you don't want to self-publish, I mean, that's always an option, but I figured, I try to make a go of it, try to get an agent, because no publisher will accept a manuscript unless you have someone who will negotiate for you. It's just the way the industry works. It's a lot like entertainment, like you need an agent, you got to know someone. It's really just, once you have a finished manuscript, you start sending it out to agents. You Google, literary agent, Jewish detective fiction, whatever genre it's in, and they'll get names, you'll send it out. Some people ask for different things. You got to send a cover letter. It's called a query letter. Some people ask for the first chapter. Some people ask for the first 10 pages. Everyone's different. And then it's, rejection after rejection after rejection, which any author who has gotten representation will tell you. It's just, it's very disheartening, but it's just the way it goes. And you just got to find that one person who believes in your vision, your manuscript. And luckily I did find someone. I mean, they called me out of the blue, and they were talking about the book as if I was talking to myself. They understood everything I was going for. So it was just, that was it. And then he negotiated with the publisher, and here we are, a book later, and another one coming out next year.
Congratulations. That's good. You had it written before, or you wrote it after?
No, I wrote it after. I came up with the idea. I mean, it's a sequel to Beat the Devils. And I came with the idea right before COVID. Then COVID hit. And I was worried the first book would never get published. Figured the world had ended. And then finally, 6 months or so later, we finally, got into the editing process, got the cover art and everything started kind of rolling along. So it's a lot of, publishing is slow, but COVID kind of just threw a wrench into the gears and just stopped everything.
Yeah. So you didn't know the agent before. It was sort of a cold email.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Was it a Jewish agent, out of just curiosity, or did you find yourself explaining things, or how did?
No,
Because it is a pretty Jewish book.
Yeah, I mean, he's like, yeah, pop culture Judaism, that's my thing. So he's totally down for it. He loves everything that I'm interested in. So it was just, it was b'sheretz, as they say.
And then the editing process, like with a publisher, I assume how much do you get say over like the book versus changing things versus sort of working within parameters that they set?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty libertarian process. It's not like it's our way or the highway. Like if they say, oh, we want to change this, but if you feel strongly about something, if you have a good enough, I mean, my publisher said, if you have a good enough reason that you want to keep something, then we'll keep it. Like, it's not, it's not like an authoritarian rule here. But I mean, honestly, they brought so much to the process, and I'm just so grateful to my editor, Wes Miller, and to the senior vice president of Grand Central, Ben Severe, and my agent. They all kind of talked me into kind of, the original ending was a little crazier and a little more over the top, a little more comic booky. And they kind of talked me off that ledge and to try to scale it back. And I'm very grateful they did. So yeah, I'm not gonna, sit here and rail against them and say all their, they want to change a million things. Their input was invaluable, and the book would not be half as good without them.
And since we do have obviously a lot of writers who submit to the journal, and many of them are looking for that sort of next step, is there a way that you think about going about getting an agent, or kind of moving to that next step after, for example, getting something published with us or with somebody else? Or
I mean, I can't, there's really no formula. I mean, if you know someone who has an agent, I guess you can reach out to them and, ask them maybe if, ask them nicely if you can put them in touch with your agent, or their agent can recommend someone. But really, it's just like, people ask me, like, I have no power. I'm low on the totem pole. I'm just happy to be here. But if I can, help recommend someone, or my agent can help recommend someone, I'm happy to lend a helping hand. But I have no veto power, as it were. But yeah, just say, like, if you want to get an agent, just reach out. If you know somebody who has an agent, reach out to them, but also do just cold emailing and sending out to agents, see if they're accepting queries, and, just hope for the best. That's what I did. I mean, I was like at my wit's end when my agent called. So it's really just, it's just a lot of trial and error.
Yeah. And so kind of on the book specifically, if we're changing gears here a little bit, you say you want to tell your grandfather's story, but it seems like a story. In what way would your grandfather fit into this sort of character, or how is it just the characteristics that are sort of your grandfather, something more?
Yeah, and it's a good question. I mean, he's very, I can't say he's a beat for beat, recreation of my grandfather. He's very loosely based on my grandfather, who was a Holocaust survivor, who was from the border of Czechoslovakia and Hungary, who was in Auschwitz. His parents sent him away when he was like 12. He was living on the streets of Budapest when the Nazis picked him up, and he was in 3 different concentration camps, including Auschwitz, and survived death march, and just saw horrible things. And I heard this, I never knew him that well growing up. He was not a very kind of emotional man. I heard these things secondhand from my father, and I just kind of started to build this character in my head. I was kind of fascinated about this story of survival and just these atrocities that my grandfather had witnessed. And I wanted to tell the story, but not really having known him, I couldn't really do, a biography or something like that. So I just kind of let that sit in the back of my mind. And then in college, I watched The Manchurian Candidate from 1962, I believe. And just all of a sudden, I wanted to tell this Cold War thriller. And I'm a huge fan of noir fiction, especially when it's set in an alternate universe, alternate history. So it was just like kind of this light bulb moment, like, why not, use this desire to tell my grandfather's story and craft this character who, part my grandfather, part me, part, Philip Marlowe and Sam Spade and all these great detective heroes. So again, it was really just a mishmash of stories I had wanted to tell already.
So your grandfather was not a detective, though, just to be clear.
He was not in the LAPD. He was in California. He was in the U.S. Army, but he was discharged. He had epilepsy, which my character does have, from blunt trauma to the head. An SS guard hit him in the head with the butt of his rifle. He was late for roll call one day. In my book, my character is hit with a shovel because he's a member of the Sonder Commando. But again, it was, I'm not going to sit here and BS you and say, yeah, my grandfather was a cop and uncovered grand conspiracies. No, it's kind of picking and choosing. And, like I said, you build this character. This is the character I've built in my head from the stories I've heard. It's not the man that exists.
Right. Do you know where, this is just a random question, in Slovakia he's from?
His town, Veritsky.
Interesting. Okay. One of my sides is from that area, also Hungary, Slovakia border.
Yeah,
so
let me know.
Not that town, but around there.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Maybe they know.
Maybe. So my grandmother also was in Auschwitz, but I don't think the males and females mix too much at that point or ever. So that's, yeah. Do you think that it's something I've noticed, we get a lot of Holocaust literature at the JLJ. There's a lot of sort of reimagining of the Holocaust itself, but yours takes place after. Is there a reason you have flashbacks to it, but you sort of avoid really going into detail on the Holocaust? Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, I mean, it just goes back to that desire to tell my grandfather's story, trying to kind of understand his frame of mind coming out of the other side of this horrible event. And, asking myself the question, what does a person look like psychologically, emotionally, physically, after going through a camp, after being starved, after being experimented on? And the answer I came away with in this book is you don't come away whole. You lose a piece of yourself. And the whole desire was just kind of understanding why wasn't my grandfather around? Why wasn't he such a loving person? And as I kind of dove into this character, it kind of just became apparent, like, yeah, it's, I'd probably cut myself off from the rest of the world too. Like, I'd be angry, I'd be bitter, I'd be upset about what happened. And so it was really a kind of cathartic, getting to write this story.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I worked on also my own novel about my grandparents after the Holocaust. And my grandmother also happened to be experimented on in the camps as well. So it's a very fascinating sort of.
And just to be clear, my grandfather was not experimented on.
Right.
But, just kind of that, delving into that, horrific Nazi experimentation side of it, and just kind of looking at things with a little bit of hindsight, almost. You're in this reality, you're 13 or so years removed from the Holocaust. You're looking back on it, and you're kind of, it's like it's a bad dream, but it's something this guy lives with. It's not just a bad dream, it's a living nightmare for this guy.
Yeah. It's almost like the definition of trauma. It's very interesting, when you get into sort of a lot of the studies that are being done now about third generation, us, and how trauma sort of travels through generations with epigenetics and that kind of stuff. It's just a fascinating sort of idea that in many ways, as sort of Holocaust survivors, we have less of them, that we're left to sort of tell their stories, and what stories we decide we want to tell, or how we process those events, knowing that we can't sort of understand them, but yet we have these sort of living memories of them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, yeah, because we can't even fathom. It's just crazy to even think that these things happened. In our just a generation or two ago, these things were happening to these people, and I mean, it's fascinating, like, in a very macabre way, but just the mind can't even fathom it with the, how blessed we are growing up in this country with, so.
Yeah, you wrote a sequel. Is it sort of in the same noir style? Does it transition to something else, or how do you?
Yeah, I'd say it picks up right after the first book, about 18 months or so after the first book. The main character is working as a private eye, because the first book he's a LAPD, and now he's a private eye, which I prefer, because you can do more things when you're working for yourself. And there's a lot of fun things you can get up to with that. So I can't go into too much detail, but it does pick up. It takes place against backdrop of Hanukkah and Christmas and holiday of 1959, and kind of broadens the narrative scope a little bit. So it's fun.
And so I assume in that alternative reality, so you have to play a little bit with sort of the history of America.
Mm-hmm.
And I did, there's a line obviously about Israel being expected to sort of collapse in your book. So that's an interesting sort of read on sort of, it's not only dealing with the trauma, it's also dealing with the historical reality. Do you think it's why that time period, or why that historical reality versus, I mean, obviously there's infinite sort of ways to go about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been asked that question a lot, and it was just kind of came down to, what haven't I seen before in this sort of literature? A lot of people, the go-to is, what if the Nazis and the Imperial Japan won World War II, the Axis powers? But I had not seen, what if McCarthy had become president, or the Red Scare had kind of gone out of control in a book before. And that's not to say that it doesn't exist. I just have not seen it. And so I wanted to do something new, explore a new time period. And it just felt right with this character I was creating, because again, it just goes back to, looking back on the Holocaust with a little bit of hindsight, and exploring themes of trauma and memory and grief and faith. I don't know, I just love kind of the 50s as kind of this vehicle of telling the story, especially because, we look back on the 50s with kind of these rose-colored glasses of, always the perfect, you have things like Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best and I Love Lucy, all these kind of idyllic depictions of American life in the 50s, when it was not really that way. was horrible racism, and there was obviously McCarthy and the Red Scare. So, there was a darkness lurking underneath, kind of this utopian, view of American society and the nuclear family, and the post-war economy that was booming, capitalism, the virtues of capitalism and all that. So it just felt interesting to kind of explore that dark underbelly of this decade that kind of is often depicted as so idyllic.
And that dark underbelly seems to be interesting because there's specifically, obviously, an anti-Semitic, not undercurrent, I would say, just current in the book, which seems very related to the Nazi sort of version of anti-Semitism. If we're gonna, do you think that it's just a generalized, there is just a sort of singular strain of anti-Semitism, or do you think it changes with culture, or how do you sort of see that through this story?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, in this reality, because Jews have been known to be socialists and communists. I mean, the Forward, started as a socialist newspaper. So it was just kind of, Jews, and the Rosenbergs, obviously, the big scandal of them giving away secrets. So it just felt like, okay, communists, okay, Jewish people, Chinese people, North Korea. It's like, who can we brand as other, because they've been known to associate with communism. And, obviously the Soviets, but, so it was really not just, Jews are bad, but Jews are communists. They've been known to associate with communism and socialism, so they are automatically evil.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting thought, right? Karl Marx is a Jew,
Right.
and so there is an inherent strangeness there around that sort of just does pervade, of like Jews being a cabal, or having, right, looking out for each other but nobody else. And sort of there are parallels that come up in sort of anti-Semitic rhetoric that would that sort of make sense in a weird way, that the book definitely sort of is hinting at or trying to tackle in some way.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you got the I mean, even though, Russia was big on communism, they also came up with the protocols of the Elders of Zion, that alleged that Jews controlled the world. So yeah, it's a very rich kind of thing to explore.
And so I see you write not only fiction, you write nonfiction. I suppose, are they related in some way, or they're sort of tangentially related?
No, I mean, I do a lot of entertainment articles for Sci-Fi and Forbes, and just kind of covering movies and films and movies, television, books, comics, all kinds of pop culture. It's not related to the book. I mean, I've had it covered at those. I've had it fortunate enough to have them cover it, but it's really just kind of me always looking for a Jewish angle or a way in. Even if it's just a line in a piece. I wrote about The Walking Dead recently, and there was locusts, like a swarm of locusts in the episode. So I just said, it's perfect timing because Passover is right around the corner. So it's just always looking for ways to kind of insert who I am and my heritage and culture into what I write.
Yeah, I think that's sort of like what has been nice about doing like my work, is that a lot of it, you sort of realize that while we don't speak about it perhaps publicly, there is a lot going on in terms of writers who are Jewish, who are trying to like get that in there, who are sort of taking ownership of that. And when I was growing up, it was like two people. You heard about Philip Roth and Chaim Potok, and that was it. That was like all the Jewish writers in the world.
Right.
And now it's a lot more sort of diverse and all over the place. So that's been a nice thing.
Yeah, and I'd say both of those writers have been, in addition to Chabon and others, have just been huge influences, especially Philip Roth. I mean, The Plot Against America is such a great book, and that was a huge influence on me.
Yeah, I would think also like a little bit of Vonnegut was in there, and some of that sort of like, alternative.
Right.
Yeah.
Philip K. Dick. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Do you see this as sort of like, you have two now, so do you see it as like a series of sort of creating 10, 12 of them, or do you think at some point you'll try and transition to something else?
I mean, my agent would love a series, so we'll see where it goes. I mean, I have ideas. I can't go beyond that, but I like this character, and I'm sure there are stories to be told if people want to read them. I have other ideas. I have a Google Doc of 50 plus pages of just book ideas and story ideas. Sorry about all the notifications.
It's okay.
There is a story I do really want to tell after the next book. We'll see if anybody buys it, but I can't. It's very. I've been kind of been stewing in my mind for a while. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Bezrat Hashem.
Yeah. Talking of time, this book took I assume you wrote it on your own time. So was it like a short process, a long process? How did it sort of go for you?
Yeah, I mean, I started in the fall of 2015 in college. My fourth year, I want to say, I was at Drexel, so it's a 5-year program. So 2015, wrote about like half of it, maybe a little less, then stopped. I didn't really know how to end it. Then I let it sit. And then I graduated in 2017 and I just started writing again. I was working a full-time job, and just in my free time, I was writing it for my own enjoyment just because the hours were awful and I wasn't really enjoying myself. So I just needed a little something for myself to kind of as a pick-me-up. So I just blazed through the second half. I finished it, I want to say early, like September or so of 2017. So it was like 2 years, it wasn't 2 years straight, but it was, 2 years all told.
Okay. So that's pretty good. I mean, that's, 2 years for this one, and then a year for the second
Yeah, I
one.
mean, it was a nice, I wrote the most recent one in, I'm gonna say like 9 months or so. So yeah, that's like kind of the more traditional time frame for a novel.
I'm just always so fascinated by the idea of our stories around the Holocaust and how it's always sort of in a victim narrative, which I understand. I mean, obviously it makes sense, but so I was like, how do we take that narrative and sort of transition it into like, well, there were still people and they still lived afterwards and they still succeeded in life in a very large way. Like, how do we sort of see it? Yes, obviously it was terrible and I would never want to take anything away from that. I don't think I could, even if I wanted to, but like, how do we sort of take that narrative and allow it to also transition into like, but they were still people who succeeded, like how we could take that and then move forward.
Right. And that's really what the book is about. It's about kind of rediscovering your faith and your kind of hope in humanity in a way. I mean, the character literally grapples with his past, both figuratively and literally. So not to give anything away, but it's, it's about this guy kind of learning that there's more than being angry and bitter about what had happened, and kind of taking control of your life.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that's sort of like, in a lot of ways, that's the message that we don't get about the Holocaust, which is like, it was a terrible event, but also because of, even despite it being a terrible event, we still are here and we still get to, we progressed. And the people who survived really, really, maybe not thrived, I don't know what the right word is, but they were successful in a way, and maybe even thrived. I don't know. That's for somebody else to judge, but that we still got to continue and they pushed through.
Right. And I mean, look it up, like, I'm the son of a grad Holocaust survivor. And, now I have a book about the Holocaust, every story, like, not to say I'm a bestseller or anything, but, it's just very gratifying to see, how the low, we went from the lowest low. And now, something like this is just, it's really gratifying.